Well, thank you very much, Mr. Dubé, for a very extensive report. I want to thank you and staff for all the work that went into this. I want to open the floor up for questions, if any, and in order to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity, I'd like you to, I'm going to suggest that we give 5 minutes each. We'll go around the table until everybody's had enough, make sure everybody gets an opportunity to speak, and we'll make sure everybody gets to ask all the questions that they wish to do so. So, I'm going to, I think for ease of reference, I think I'll just start at the end of the table here. Councillor Pellerin, do you have anything that you'd like to raise at this time?
Thank you, Your Worship. So do we have a commitment from the province of New Brunswick for the funding for a set amount?
Not for a set amount. The Premier has said on many occasions in public, has been published in our local newspaper, that he's committed to seeing the project to fruition. But he also clearly stated that he wants to see the final business case. He wants to see what the actual final ask and what the project will look like, who are the partners and all that. So, but he is committed to supporting the project. So that's all. That's what much as I can say with that at this point.
Okay, so the city has a capital works for the next 5 years. Obviously, it's adopted on a yearly basis. Does the province have such a thing? And if so, is that in the next foreseeable future?
Project does have a capital budget. You would not typically find this project funding in the capital budget of the province. Where the money would typically come from this project would be either from two sources. One, a federal provincial agreement, i.e. the Building Canada Fund, which will only be established next, or through the budgets of RDC. In the budgets of RDC, they have special project money on a line item in RDC's budget that basically provides them with grant funding for various things, and it would be lumped into that, right? The way I see this coming down from the province personally is that it's either two ways: either unilaterally through RDC's budget over a three-year contribution agreement. You know, if we're looking for, say, $30 million, would likely flow $10 million a year for 3 years, something like that. Or if it's a federal provincial agreement, it would be flowed through RDC through progress payments against costs incurred. So that's how it would likely come down if the province gets involved. Okay. So either of those two options, I would say.
So the constraints that the province is under, you still foresee a positive note from the province?
Well, I think as council members and council generally has said in the past, you know, the province of New Brunswick stands to reap a lot of benefits from a downtown centre. Not only in terms of selling tickets for people attending the events at that particular location, because it generates a sales tax, but also on the construction itself. There's a significant amount of tax revenue that would be going back to the province. So the province, when we go to the province at the end of the day, we're going to have to show them a business case that says, based on our calculations, you're going to get your investment back. And we have to really portray this as an investment, right? Because they're going to invest money, but they're going to get money back through sales tax and income tax, right? And you know, in the case of the city of Moncton, we don't have that direct payback. Well, where our payback lies is in the jobs that are created in the community and the you know, the more secondary economic impacts and the property taxes that will be generated by the peripheral development around it, you know, with the exception of the centre itself. We won't generate tax, you know, on that. We'll have to pay tax to the province for our downtown centre itself, right, on our property. But the peripheral development, 7 acres of land, will generate property tax. So let's say there's $100 million, $150 million in development around the centre, that will generate property tax back. But we don't get as much back, or as much back as quickly as the province would in terms of that development.
Have we explored asking a province for a property tax deferral or forgiveness?
The rink portion of the property would be like the Coliseum, would be exempt from property tax. But what's around it, what's not considered part of the rink, would be taxable. Okay, so to answer your direct question, no, we haven't pursued further options at this point. Frankly, just because we don't believe that there's much prospect of getting a positive answer from that under the current scenario. I doubt that it would change fiscal policy at this time. Specific thing, we'd be probably more inclined to give us a direct grant to allow us to.
Now, the $107 million, is that today's dollars or future dollars?
The $107 million is, correct me if I'm wrong, John, it's, what did we use on the $107 million, John? Which year, which dollars were we using there again?
Your Worship, those dollars would be based on the 16 and 17, 2016, 2017 dollars is estimated.
Yeah.
So if we would work back 3% a year, that would be something like $95 million today.
It'd be less, yeah.
That probably is.
Yeah. Looking at, yeah, probably
Okay.
closer to 90.
So when we're going to be doing the ask to the provincial government, can we use future dollars? Or do we have to use today's dollars?
I think what we have to show to the provincial government is what the actual project will cost in future dollars. Ask them for money associated with that, right? Because their money will be coming to us likely, if they do agree, you know, it's still an if they do agree, then they would likely be cutting us checks in 2015, 16, and 17, right? So it'll be dollars that are worth what they're worth at that time.
Okay, so the government does do that, future dollars, and not...
Not normally, not normally. I would say they're going to give you an amount of money, but they'll be considered what what $10 million is worth in 2015, 16, and 17. I don't think they won't be using present value calculations to establish their grant.
Okay, and what's the contingency fund that we've built into this?
John, can you comment on
For
that?
cost overruns?
Excuse me, Your Worship, contingency would be a factor that would be included in the overall amount. But I just remind council that we're still based on scenarios.
Right.
There's zero detailed costing, but contingency, when final costing does become a fact, obviously would include contingency dollars at that point.
Okay, but what's the estimate today? Is it 10% of the cost? Is it 5%, 7%?
I'd have to suggest that somebody like Mr. Tate would respond to that, but I'd estimate based on other projects anywhere from, let's say, 5 to 10%, just the same numbers you quoted. Depends on the nature of the project and the risk that's deemed based on the design and requirements.
Yeah, typically we use about 10%. The model, the scenario I put up a while ago, really is a scenario around a certain amount of money, and that certain amount of money would obviously include a contingency in it, right? So it's just a certain amount of money. So in the day, you could assume about a 10% contingency in that amount. That would be normally the case, as John says. It's usually in 5 to 10% range, but it's not specific to any, number of seats necessarily. We're talking about a magnitude of a project, and typically those magnitudes of projects, you do include a contingency at all times.
Great. And John, does that include the our portion of the HST, the taxes that we're going to have to actually pay?
Your Worship, yes. Again, it's today's estimate of our all-in cost.
Yeah.
And as the city manager indicated, this is the second scenario, at least the second scenario, and each scenario, as it gets closer to the end, may have a slightly different look and feel, but it would be all-inclusive cost, all-in cost.
Okay, so basically the 3.25%, which is what I think we pay out of the HST.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Pellerin, are you close to the end? Because I want to keep everybody moving.
Yeah, I'll probably ask some more questions. Thank you, Your Worship.
Happy to come back to you. Okay, Councillor Landry?
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I believe that we should live within our own means, but I also think that it's a good project. I think the downtown needs a little bit of sprucing up. You see all these parking lots and everything. I think we can load them up with some businesses and make downtown a generator. I'm glad to see that we've set some deadlines on these stuff so that we can have a go-ahead forward and see where we are. And any time that we feel that it's not feasible, we have the opportunity to say no. It's a good report. Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Dubé, for this. I thought it was it's very succinct and certainly puts the total project in perspective, and I think that was very well delivered, and certainly shows the amount of work that has happened since the start, and certainly in terms of the way it's been communicated, I think this was a nice way to bring it all together. I guess my only thoughts would be in and around, I guess, even looking at going beyond Highfield Square. And so I just sort of put this out because of the fact that we did receive a presentation at one point on, what St. George Street, for example, could look like. And then we also know that, we have the Moncton Market and we have the riverfront. And so, and then we finally have Resergo Place. I guess I look at those as four, and of course Highfield Square that we're talking about. So I look at those as really four very important pieces. And I don't know how that incorporates into all of this, but I guess ultimately, it's one of those things where, if you're going to build your house, well, then you often, you might think, well, geez, maybe I should build a garage and maybe I should do a little bit of extra stuff, right? Yeah. And leverage all of that together. And so I know that hasn't been the focus, but I certainly, in looking at downtown, think that I feel at least that we need to look at beyond just one location. We saw a development tonight, proposed in behind City Hall here that really is quite a distance away from where we're, talking about the Highfield Square site. But yet it's very close proximity to Resergo Place. Right. And it's actually very close proximity to the Moncton Market. So if anything at all, I would like to I guess, open up that discussion. We have a huge opportunity in Moncton to move forward with our downtown. And I think we can do it right. And I really am pleased to see the way I guess the budgeting process will occur, and how we're very clear in terms of our objectives, and we want to be fiscally responsible. And so I just put that out there, and I think that as we move forward, I would like to hear a little more on all of that, because I think to bring development together and to really allow developers, private developers outside of what we're talking about, the project, to go ahead. If we show that those four pillars, if I want to call them, are affected by this, everything in between starts to be generated as well. So I don't know your comments on that, but certainly would like you to consider that.
Sure. Well, thanks very much for that comment, and I share your vision and enthusiasm for downtown development. Before I do get to that, though, Your Worship, I did want to, and I neglected to do this because Paul reminded me earlier. I did want to advise Council that all of the Moncton people at the Boston Marathon have been located and found safe. So anybody who's heard about bombings in Boston, everyone has been found, located, and is accounted for. Nobody was killed or injured in any fashion. The other thing I want to say is that, and I neglected to do this too, is that I just wanted to remind or advise Council and the public that the next update of this particular project will be on May 6th at the Public Council meeting, where we will talk about the RFQ results and the development of the RFP document and the updated 30-year financial plan. Now, I want to go back to your comment, Councillor. The beauty of this particular project in terms of development is that we believe that it will trigger a lot more development. There's a site there that's got 7 acres of land that is available for development beyond just the downtown center itself. So we've got potential there of, tens of millions of dollars, literally, in development and a lot of facade on Main Street, a lot of facade. Right across the street, we have the Crown Plaza Hotel. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine that the owners of the Crown Plaza Hotel bought that property to leave it in the condition that it's now in. They need to redo a parking structure there. They've bought other properties around it. They bought the former Acadian bus line terminal next to it, et cetera. So we believe that there's significant potential for development of that particular site. When you look further down and across the street, across the train track, into the lands owned by Dick Carpenter, it's easy to envisage a connection, right, to extend Highfield Street right through and either over or under the train tracks and access that land from that point. And that would open up all that land. Even if you opened it up through a pedway system or a tunnel going under the tracks, you would open up access to that land as well. So there's a lot of land on that side of the tracks that could be potentially developed, and it could be triggered by such a development as this, right? And I'm just blue sky thinking here, but the other potential, I believe, is downtown. The province of New Brunswick recently put out a tender for the old jail, right? And we're calling for proposals to redevelop the old jail. Right across the street from that is the old fire hall, right? And it's on prime piece of land. It's being, I would argue, grossly underutilized at the moment, in terms of its use, on prime piece of property in the river and overlooking the beautiful waterfront that we have. So there again, there are potential opportunities for development. We have other developers who have come in to see us recently who have said, we have this piece of property we want to develop, right? Now we'll have to be clever about it. We'll have to be, ingenious about how we proceed with those developments, because I think, as Councillor Bourgeois mentioned earlier in one of the presentations, talked about, there might be some big dollars coming down the pipe in terms of infrastructure in some of these projects, and there likely will be some of them, right? We'll have to look at those on a business case by business case perspective. But the potential is enormous. When you look at the map that shows all this surface parking all over the city, there's a lot of potential there, big potential in terms of redevelopment. So I think it's just not one thing, as you say. I think there's a lot of things that could be done over the very, very short period of time, over the next 5 years, for example.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, Jacques, as was said, I really appreciate the presentation that you've done this evening. I think that gives the public a really good understanding of where we came from and where we're at. And as you know, I have been involved with Councillor Hicks and Jim Lockyer on that committee. In fact, one of the subcommittees I was on was the Finance Committee, and I know we had some certain concerns there. However, I'm pleased to see that, I'm really interested to see what is coming out of the RFQs that we put out, and what kind of proposals we're getting from those people. I'm also very pleased to see that the infrastructure funding that caused us a huge amount of problem in the past, that I think we can overcome that, and that would make it a lot more palatable, I think, for everyone if we're able to get a good chunk from the federal government. And it sounds to me like our MP is very optimistic, and providing we indicate our priorities, as I said before. So that makes it worthwhile. I was always concerned, and I think a lot of us are, we don't want to certainly make this a burden to our taxpayers. As somebody indicated, there's a lot of people out there in fixed incomes, and we understand that. And I certainly don't want to make that, I want to make it a success, and I want to make it move forward, but not at any expense. And that is one has always been a concern. So I really think the presentation you did tonight really will generate a lot of discussion within the citizens of Moncton, and they have a better understanding of what is going on and what will happen. And like I said, I'm really anxious to see what will come from the RFQs that we put out, and those look like very promising, very high profiles of people, and we'll see what they have to offer. Thank you again for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Arnold.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. And yet again, thank you. It was great. That was the first time that I, as a not-so-new councillor, had seen it all put together like that. So I really appreciate that opportunity. I was interested in your comment that governments rarely offer up more than 50%. That was sort of my sense of things. But I today received an email from a citizen that was speculating, saying, well, if it's such a great idea, why I don't want my tax dollars to be invested in this, it should be all private. Have you heard of any such development like this anywhere in Canada that was completely privately funded?
Personally, I have not, although like of this scale in this size of community, I have not found one that's been privately funded. You know, if you look at the Bell Centre in Montreal, which is being funded by private money, it's the Bell Centre and it's Montreal, right? So it's a little different dynamic. You know, you have different numbers of nights that place is busy and that kind of thing, right? Customer base is much different than ours. The market is much different. So the answer is no. I've not particularly seen any. You know, if Kevin is here, Kevin, have you seen any of ours? Our research has shown none of that, right? So we've looked at a lot of that across Canada and the United States, and we couldn't find any, you know, in our due diligence to date that where private sector money will do it all. It's not possible.
Thank you. That was sort of my sense, but I just wanted a second opinion. I'm also very interested in the economic assessment, and I'm just sort of wondering what some of the parameters around that study will be. I've been hearing so much, wide variety of sources about people that are not making decisions until we make our decision on this, and I feel that for a couple of years now, there have been a lot of projects that have been on hold in our city because they're waiting for this to find out what we're going to do. I mean, you mentioned the Crown Plaza. I mean, there are many, many others. So I know, have a sense that if this was to go forward, that yes, there would definitely trigger a great deal of other development. But can you just give me an idea of what this economic impact study is going to be analyzing?
Absolutely. First of all, it'll look at the estimated capital costs and how that will impact the community. You know, what that construction job, how many jobs that will create directly, indirectly, what's the level of investment around a, you know, arguably a $95 million project, right? So to look at the income, direct and indirect income generated by both during construction and after. It'll look at the total employment impact by that facility, both short-term and long-term. It'll look at the total gross domestic product that the project will generate on a short-term and a long-term basis. It would look at income tax impacts to the federal and provincial governments, right? We'll have very clear numbers there. It'll look at sales tax receipts that will inure to the benefit of the federal and provincial government. It'll look at facility operating expenditure and GDP impacts of that, so the actual operation of the facility and how the GDP will be affected by such an ongoing operation. It'll look at the ongoing employment reports, the net tax impacts to both the province and the federal government and, of course, the municipality. It'll look at hotel spending in the region, how it would impact hotel spending. As we heard earlier tonight, hoteliers are looking for more business. It will look at that as well. It'll also look at the impact around the site. In other words, as Councillor Leger mentioned, you know, there's all kinds of things that could happen here, right, in Moncton, a lot of developments. This project will incite other developments. There's no doubt about that. To what extent is a matter of financial modeling and estimating and looking at other developments. We will hear on Wednesday from London how they saw development in their community as a result of their downtown center. Now, they'll talk about that, I'm sure. But this study will look at that, right? We'll look at, you know, we'll do the assessment growth, the estimated assessment growth that the city would incur with or without such a facility, right? So we'll look at those kinds of things. So it'll be sort of qualitative factors and quantitative factors examined in such an economic impact, right? So it'll be a fairly substantive study. You know, I have a copy of the study that was done by Sierra Planning and Management. I think the date was March 2011. This study will be updated now, local experts in this area, and so we'll get fresh numbers now based on what we know today as opposed to what we knew back in 2011.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Dubé, I just have one question at this point, just to follow up on the economic assessment you've been talking about. The costs that you have described, potential costs for the center, those are all gross costs and do not take into account any revenue that will come to the city as a result of any other development that it might stimulate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Boudreau.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Merci pour... Thank you for your presentation, Jacques. Mr. Dubé. Personally, I trust that the analytical process will continue its normal course for this really extraordinary project. However, it is clear that the feasibility of the project or the non-feasibility of it will become clearer as we as the process follows its normal course. Once again, I'm only speaking for myself, but currently, right now, it is too early to take a definitive stance and to give my unconditional support to this project at this point. I knew that before, I've always known that, but we do have to go through these different stages, these different steps, and I am satisfied with the work that has been done so far. And I trust that the process, as I mentioned earlier, the process will continue on its normal course. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Thériault. Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Dubé. It's very encouraging to see all of the work that's been done. And I think we still have a lot of work to do. But it's important to be able to place this project in its historical context. I think Mr. McConnell did a good job this evening when he talked of sport. If this type of project, if we look at the people who are resisting this type of project, well, if we had taken that attitude in the past, we might not have a university, we probably wouldn't have a hospital, we wouldn't have a theater, we wouldn't have Wheeler Boulevard, we wouldn't have anything in Moncton. But once we're able to get over and beyond that initial concern, people end up very happy with the projects. So I think that this exercise, this whole project is very similar. So thank you. And congratulations, and we're going to continue to work on it. Thank you. Thank you.
Worship, Jacques, great presentation. Glad, like Councillor Arnold was saying, I'm glad that I can see a little bit more information than what I already knew. That's great. Great to see the stages that it's going through as well and what you project, provided that we're on target, obviously, right? Can you touch on the infrastructure just quickly for me? You did mention it in your presentation. Just maybe give me a little bit insight on it. I would appreciate it.
In what sense, in what context?
Well, you had mentioned, you know, funding and development and where this project leads us towards infrastructure. Are you talking in specifically the downtown area and updating? Is that's what I'm assuming you're discussing?
Yep. I spoke about infrastructure in a number of ways. One is, you know, we have a piece of infrastructure called the Moncton Coliseum, right? And that piece of infrastructure does not meet our needs currently or the needs of our partners in the sports and entertainment industry. So it's a question of looking at that piece of infrastructure and saying, how do you replace that?
Okay.
Right? So there's really two choices on that front. One is you fix it up. You fix the Coliseum up, you raise the roof, you make the roof higher. In other words, going from about 30 feet to 55 to 60 feet, putting in corporate boxes, those kinds of things, upgrading heat and air conditioning, mechanical and electrical systems to meet code, those kinds of things, right?
So we can move to a more updated version of...
Correct. That's going to cost about $40 million
Right.
if you did that, right? In a, say, arguably a 9,000 seat facility. If you make the Coliseum a 9,000 seat facility, you're looking at about $42 to $44 million. If you're looking at a 7,500 seat facility with corporate boxes, you're probably looking at, and you have a copy of that in your box now, you're looking at somewhere between $38 and $40 million for that.
Okay.
So you take that and you look at that and say, is that what we want to do as a council? We want to take that 40-year-old building and put another skin on it, raise the roof. That would imply putting the Wildcats out of that building for at least half a season on either end of 2 seasons or a whole season. Well, there are implications. You know, we would wipe out a trade show business for a year approximately, right? Those are the kinds of implications you got to consider when you look at that. On the other hand, you know, the infrastructure associated with the Coliseum could be repurposed at a much lesser cost, right? Keeping the roof at the same level, keeping the same seats, you know, basically putting some air handling system in place, dehumidification unit in there, keeping the trade show space as is, right, and continue to rent that out. So it could be repurposed.
Okay.
As I described earlier, it could mean that we take some of the land that surrounds it and take out some of that parking, because we wouldn't need it at that point, right? So you're looking at that kind of a model. The other point, the other thing I mentioned in terms of infrastructure is the infrastructure deficit. And like any other municipality across the country, we have an infrastructure deficit. We will always have an infrastructure deficit, right? That means an infrastructure deficit with sewer pipes, storm sewers, streets, our buildings. There's an infrastructure deficit associated with this particular building, right? Because it was built, and every time, it's like your house. I mean, I could always put another coat of paint, or always replace put some ceramic tile or whatever in my house. But, at the end of the day, we all manage our own little infrastructure deficit in our own home. Cities is no different. So when we look at this project, and we look at the 30-year plan that we've already have developed and presented to council in the past, a 30-year plan based on a certain set of assumptions. I think the assumptions now, John, are up to about 85 or so, something like that. But it's important for the city to look to the future, and to look at this project and our infrastructure deficit and all the other needs that the city has, right? The city council has said we want splash parks in every ward. We want parks and trails. We want buildings. We want skating rinks. We want other services. We want garbage collection. We want good street lighting. We want good streets cleaning, snow removal, all of that. So what we've done in our 30-year plan is we've taken everything that we know that the city will have to do over the next 30 years in relation to streets, in relation to buildings, in relation to the downtown center, in relation to the Coliseum, in relation to parks, playgrounds, trails, splash parks, etc. Everything that we have to do. We factored that in and come up with a 30-year plan that shows every year where we are in terms of our debt ratios, in terms of our total capital spending, in terms of our debt repayments, all of that. So when you think about infrastructure, you have to think about it in those terms. It's like having an annual operating budget for your house. I have a simple way of doing my own accounting, because I just have an Excel spreadsheet where I plug in all my revenue, and I plug in all my expenses week to week to week to week, and I put that out for 52 weeks, and I decide on where I'm going to spend my capital dollars and how much money I can borrow at the bank, or how much I do whatever, right? It's the same thing here at the city, except in the city context, you have to look at it on a long-term basis. We got so much infrastructure. We got so many miles of streets. We have so many miles of pipe. We have so many buildings that we have to manage them all, right? So when we think about building a substantial capital project like this one, it's got to fit within the context of all of that, right? So when I think about we think about infrastructure, John and I and the rest of the SMG team, we think about it in those terms, because we have to say, okay, if we're going to recommend something to council, it's got to fit,
right?
And then we got to be able to afford it, right? At the end of the day. So when I think about infrastructure, I think about it in that sense going forward.
Okay, I had a few questions on the dollars and cents as well, but Councillor Pellerin seemed to cover those as well, so by the time it got to me. One thing that I want to see, maybe if it could transition forward when the plans come out on this and it gets through the zones and the qualification it needs to. The architect's drawing is specifically what we're discussing, no condos, no greenery, no parks, no, I think that's the confusion, that people are looking at this and they're seeing condos and they're seeing extra streets and they're seeing parks and they're seeing, shops and boutiques.
Yep.
And they're assuming that that is part of this actual downtown center, but it's actually on the outside of the building.
That's correct, yeah. And absolutely, the site itself, like I say, is 11 acres, only 4 of which would be used and owned by us,
Right.
theoretically. Now, we may get into a land lease with the other 7 acres, we may get into a land lease. We may get into a fee simple title. We may sell the property to the private developer who wants to develop on their own time and their own dime, based on criteria and conditions that council sets, right? So that part of the development is not our responsibility financially. It should never be, right? Because if council buys the land, then it has a great asset there.
Right.
And it can decide what it wants to see on that property. But at the same time, it's got to be a partnership, because it's got to be financially feasible from a business perspective. Somebody's going to come in and develop those properties. They have to see, it has to be a bankable deal.
100%.
Right? So at the end of the day, all this will be brought back to council, because when we get to the RFP stage, it's at that point where the developers will come back with some very specific proposals, some very specific financial requirements or conditions that they want to put on the table. And that's when the game starts.
Okay.
That's when the negotiation really begins, right? It's at that RFP stage. When we get those responses, it's that point when council will decide, well, of those three potentially, that one right there is the one we like the best. And we're going to sit down and negotiate with that particular company and consortium to come up with a final deal that council can live with, right? That has the maximum benefit for the city of Moncton, in your opinion, collectively, right? Well, that's how that will work. And I think, you know, it's very important at this stage that that council seriously considers going to that next step of the RFP process, because that's when the rubber will hit the road, literally. That's when council will be in a position to be able to judge the pros and cons and the real deal that will be presented to council at that time by the private sector. Right. This will be a significant investment by the private sector at the end of the day. Right.
It's good to hear because
if you don't mind, I'd like to
Sure.
move on. I'll come back to you.
Yeah, I was done actually.
Okay,
So we're good.
that's great.
Thank you,
very
Jacques.
much. Councillor Bourgeois.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Jacques. My first comment, and you can cut me off after 5 minutes, but I'd like to say that thank you for putting this on the agenda finally. I've been a councillor for 5 years, and it's the first time really that we've been able to ask all of these questions. We've had different presentations in private, and each time it was, well, we're not going to ask too many questions because it's all confidential transactions. But this is the first time really that we're able to have a discussion on it. So it's really great. And thank you for your presentation, Mr. Dubé. It was excellent. And we were learning new information. This financial scenario that you're presenting here today is completely different from what we adopted. So it might be a little frustrating for me, but the project is never the same every time it's presented to us, every time we see it. It's very difficult to follow sometimes, but at least, I mean, it's a whole shift compared to what we had adopted in the budget when we changed the 25 million to 53, but which is unacceptable in my mind. But anyhow, that's another issue, and I'll get back to it. But thank you. I have 31 questions, so cut me off after 5 minutes, and I'll come back after. But these are questions that I need in order to do my own due diligence. I don't expect you answers. There might be questions that you'll be able to answer today, but others you might have to get back to me on it, and I think that'll be the case in most of them. But I'll ask you the questions, and then I can send you the list through email afterwards if you wish. My first question, just to check if there was a typo in the document, because the councillor report form that you gave us indicate 55 million. We had approved a capital budget of 53 million. Today you're suggesting 38 million based on this financial scenario. And if, unless I'm mistaken, 28 million was a possibility. I know that it changes, but we did approve officially, the council, last December, $53 million. I'm not wrong, am I? No, you're not wrong for December, but there were 2 million more that had already been approved previously, so which gives a total of 55 million. Okay, so that's 55 million. And then eventually, I'm hoping that we're going to go from 53 million to a lot less. Well, yeah, that's my objective. That's what I'm hoping to, yeah. And my second question then, and the total amount for the land, because I have two figures. I have 10 million, I have 12 million for the land. Would it be 12 then, because the 2 million from before and the 10 million in the future? The 10 million has been identified for the land acquisition as such. But the 2 million, that 2 million that was approved previously in 2012, was not earmarked for the land per se. It was rather, it had been approved for the project. But we consider that internally that we have 12 million to play with for the land acquisition, the demolition, and the cleanup, the environmental remediation cleanup. So we have that amount. That's how we consider it. We're hoping to spend less than that, quite frankly, but we'll see in time. So we've budgeted $12 million for that, for total, yeah. Yes, I am hoping. Now, the Hotel Association that was here earlier, and maybe I should have asked them the question, but I didn't want to embarrass them, but their contribution is spread out over 10 years, right? Yes, 10 years officially, $250,000 per year for 10 years, and they're very open to negotiate a longer term. So my question is, well, is it conditional to there being an accommodation levy? But we've been asking the government for 15 years. It's been promising legislation. But if it comes back and doesn't pass this law, is there still a guarantee that whether or not there's this hotel levy or not, the hotel association does commit to collect this amount of money? I mean, do we have that guarantee? We don't have a guarantee, but according to our discussions with them, they are open to it. They're very optimistic, as we are, on the government's intentions in that issue. But I think they will respect their commitment even without it. But it was clear when Mr. Roberge spoke this evening, he said, if we were to have the bill necessary, we would do it. Now, he said it publicly this evening, but in our discussions with them in the past, it was always, well, if it doesn't go ahead, they were ready to get together themselves to participate with us anyhow. Because as a councillor, when I'm looking at when I see the budget in 6 months, if I'm still here, that's another issue. But if the budget were presented to us and instead of giving us $700,000, 700,000, yeah, per year, I would rather see 500,000 per year for 30 years than 700 for 10 years, because if I look at the full life of the project, the taxes that are going to be paid by taxpayers and businesses, it's a little less. Yeah, but the challenge is this, though I do agree with you. The challenge is this, and it also applies to the downtown merchants. They're ready to commit for 10 years. They're ready to extend that for 15 years, but any longer than that, what they're saying is that they're not sure they'll even still exist as an organization. So even if they commit for more than 15 years, I mean, it's only worth what it's worth. I mean, there's nobody is ready to sign for more than 15 years at this time, based on our discussions. And I understand that too, because so I can only come to the conclusion that if we can do a contribution for 15 years, that would probably be the maximum. The question then is, well, what is the amount then, as you're asking? And that'll have to be discussed too, which leads me to my next question. Legally, and I'm asking you the question and then you can send it to legal services, but because we already charge a levy to the downtown merchants, so even if the downtown merchants were to say, okay, we're committing to 10 years, if after that, could council say, we're going to charge an amount equivalent within the levy, it might be 10 cents or 15 cents, or it's 15 cents or 5 cents. Well, we'll add another cent that would go. I mean, it would force them, because they're the ones who are going to benefit, really. And then legally, could we do that? Well, that comes back. It would have to be answered by government. But the way I understand the bill, the law on this, is that the downtown merchants have to present their proposed budget to council every year, and council has the power to approve or not. And I don't think that you have the authority to impose something that they would reject, and they'd have to come back. But I mean, it would be a bit the same. It would force negotiations. It wouldn't be desirable, but I can come back to you with a more legal answer. Okay, I'll ask one more question, and then I'll ask His Worship if he wants to cut me off. This study on the Coliseum, and my question was, well, when are we going to get the study? But you just said we've already received. Okay, well, that's good then. But is that does it take both options into consideration? Because one would be a 9,000 seat facility, and the other one would be 7,500, which is not 6,800. But could we rehabilitate the Coliseum without adding new seats, keeping the 6,800? I know it's not downtown, and that makes it more complicated. But just add the corporate boxes and the other themes. Would that be considered?
Trois options dans l'étude.
OK.
C'est
One is to raise the ceiling to 55 feet and to keep the seats where they are. To keep the Coliseum as it is, it will not attract any events. So option 1 is the status quo with the 55-foot ceiling. The second option is 5,500 seats with boxes and keeping the roof at 55 feet high. And then the cost would be approximately I'm looking for the study here. To come back to the question of costs, on the 3 options, so we're talking about 44 million for 9,000 seats with boxes. That's the net cost with GHT. 2,250 seats would be about 40 million. The last option would be the status quo with the roof at 55 feet, and that would cost about 30 million. So to get back to your question, it would be about 30 million. That's perfect. Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to stop here. I'll come back later. Yes, you're at...
Okay, but my questions only lasted about a minute and a half. The answers lasted 7.5.
That I can't control. Councillor Hicks.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. Good try. Thank you, Mr. Dubé, for the presentation. And as Councillor Bourgeois has mentioned, that we don't, people will be surprised, but we don't actually get a chance to talk about this very often, either in private and certainly not in public. I was interested, though, with the presentation, because this was just handed out to us as you started. And the numbers that we received on Thursday were, some of the numbers were kind of as well. So it looks like they've changed even from Thursday to Monday, because what we had on Thursday was 107 million total, but the city's contribution was cash of 10 and $55 million for 65. The other government was 32. Now we're saying the other government tonight is 40, almost 48.
Yeah. Sorry.
So it's changed just in the last 3
What
days.
we wanted to show on this council report form was what council actually approved already. No, this is what's in your capital budget. This is what's out there now. So there's no surprises. But we, internally, we're working, as I mentioned earlier, on the 30-year plan, and we believe that because of the federal budget that came down a couple of weeks ago, and they said we're gonna create a new Building Canada plan, and we're gonna fund sports facilities. We said, hooray! Thank you very much for that. What are the rules? Of course, we don't know the rules yet. They're only going to know the rules once the federal provincial negotiations are completed towards the end of this year, early next year. So we're making some assumptions now on the basis of the outcome of that program. So but I think it's important to recognize that both the federal government and the province have said they support the project. So let's find out if they will support the project, and to what extent, and through what programming, right? They talked about 2 elements. One is the Building Canada plan, and the other one is an enhancement to the gas tax. And the gas tax issue is something that's to be considered by council at some point, because since they've enhanced the gas tax federally, what does that mean in real terms, in terms of dollars back to the city? And do we really want to spend that on downtown centers, or do we want to spend it on roads, right, for example? So these are all questions that have to be answered, right?
Yeah, my only point is that Councillor Boudreau mentioned that this is fluid, and it's really difficult, Council, at this point to make any definitive, statements about where we stand. My position is where it was in 2010, that
sure.
We have to have a solid business plan, and my thing has always been about, at that time I said, show me how we can finance
right.
25 million plus 4 with not affecting the tax rate, and that's where we are today. I guess my point is, though, my first question was that things are very fluid. We were saying 32 million on Thursday, and on Monday for the province or the other government, and tonight it's close to 48 million. So things are changing quickly. I do have some questions, just some quick ones. It was about Brent Mazerow did an article back in 2013, January 14th, about the London Centre, and it was a very good article. There's some interesting information there. Talked about London's project had 20.6% of the project was funded by private partners. Moncton's RFP, will we be looking for a similar amount of private investment?
We'll be asking the private sector whether they're prepared to make an equity investment in the project. In the case of London, it was about a $44 million project.
46.
Yeah, it was in that ballpark, right? And in that case,
According to Brent.
all I can tell you is it was in the $45 million bracket. So, by recollection, my memory may be flawed, and maybe very well be 46. Bottom line in that project was Ellis Don was the builder. Ellis Don invested $2 million as what I would consider to be pref share deal, where they put in money only to get repaid later. So they were putting $2 million up front, and they got repaid back by the city at some point in time, and they did. The other deal that happened there was $10 million put in by Global Spectrum, who was actually one of the proponents, one of the partners with Ellis Don in our RFQ. Global Spectrum at that point decided it was going to put $10 million into that project as cash against the capital cost under an agreement whereby they would get repaid that $10 million on the basis of the operating net profits of the facility before debt, okay, without including the debt. So Global Spectrum operated the facility. They were given an incentive to generate profits, right? So in other words, you get your $10 million back based on the profits you generate. So in the first 10 years of that deal in London, Global Spectrum recouped about 70% of the $1.5 million in net operating profits before debt of that facility, and that's how they got their $10 million back. After that 10-year period, that percentage flipped. In other words, 70% of the net operating profits before debt was turned back to London, the city, and 30% was kept by Global Spectrum as basically a management to operate the facility. And that's how it is. That's how it stands today. So that's how that equity investment got placed in that project. Yeah. And there's no reason to believe that I couldn't guarantee you at this point whether the private sector partners that are at the table now will offer up something similar. But we'll definitely be asking them as part of the RFP process whether they're prepared to invest in our project or not.
And that was my only point, is that, yeah, that there were things that they did, which I think the article was great. You know, talked about that the city did not guarantee their loan applications, that the private partners had to assume that debt. There was 20% initially coming back of the profits to London in between years 11 and, I don't know, 50 or whatever, it went up to 30%. So I think those are all important things that we should consider in putting in our RFP.
I will clarify one point, is that the City of London took on the debt. Took on somewhere in the vicinity of about $30 million. They actually took that on their books. So they were the holders of the debt, and they owned the building, they owned the land, and they still do, and they always did. So it was the City of London that backstopped the deal on the loan side. Ellis Don and Global Spectrum had nothing to do with the debt in that particular case.
No, and that's what we have to define. All I'm quoting from was what Brent had. He had the city's debt was roughly $32 million, but 9.5 was private, and the city did not guarantee or back that debt. Of a project of this size, I mean, it's huge when you look at where the debt was 15 years ago, where it stands today, and where we're projecting to be in 30 years' time. Right. And you know, we really have to do our due diligence. This is not something that we're going to pull a Brian Mulroney and roll the dice on. We really have to know what the kind of guarantees are here. Our permits over the last 10 years have averaged about $152 million a year. So at some point, will we be getting, in our due diligence, kind of guarantees from somebody, or best estimate guarantees, if somebody's putting their name and their reputation on it, that over the next 10 years, that with the downtown center, this is what we think our building permits are going to look like, and without the downtown center, this is what we think our building permits are going to look like?
I don't think anybody would sign a guarantees like that.
No, I'm saying somebody's going to put their name, their reputation on what this is a best estimate at this time.
Well, I'll certainly be making a recommendation based on the best information we can generate, and I'll stand behind the recommendation. But to suggest that someone would say, we're definitely going to get this much dollars out of tax base because of a project, It's really an estimate based on the best information you can generate based on the modeling, the economic models.
Sure, no, I realize that. Like, I did budgets for you, actually doing them in August for the next year. I know a budget or an estimate is the best guess at that point in time.
What you're suggesting, Councillor, is that I or somebody here at City Hall could predict what a developer could do across the street and what that value is.
No, I'm just talking about dollars. I'm just talking about lump sum dollars.
It's not possible. We can provide you with estimates and models and assumption-based models. We can provide you with information of what happened in other areas of the country where similar developments occurred and what that happened. We'll be able to suggest to you at the RFP stage, once we get the final submissions, is what's going to happen on the site, i.e. the 7 acres. I think we can make some fair assumptions in terms of some of the ancillary properties like across the street at the Crown Plaza and others, but to suggest that I can guarantee the tax-based increase over 10 years or 20 years within a kilometer site there's no guarantees in that. I think you have to take.
I heard you say tonight something like $250 million.
Pardon me?
I thought I heard you say tonight something like $250 million. That number has to come from somewhere.
It did, and it actually came from the cost of construction of the facility, which is somewhere between $95 and $100 million. Plus, if you look at a site that's 7 acres in size, it's fair to say that could probably generate $100 to $150 million in additional development costs. Depending on what goes on it, right? But that part of it, I'm prepared to, we'll be in a position to show you, based on the private sector submissions associated with that 7-acre site. Because once you start looking and examining in detail the proposals under the RFP, they will have to come to the council with some very specific proposals with timelines of projects that they will build on that 7 acres. Yeah. Right? That could be condominiums, hotels, office space, retail space. There's a lot of frontage on Main Street there. Could be structure. All of that will all be quantified in detail. Beyond that, it's really an estimate based on experience of others elsewhere, right? And what we know from our own intelligence based on discussions we have with individual developers around the neighborhood of that particular center, right?
Yeah. And all, what I'm saying is that we can't just look at all the success stories like London. Moncton isn't London. We have to, I've done some due diligence. There are some real horror stories out there as well. We have to look at those.
Well, we'll be looking at a lot of information, a lot of examples of other sites, and we already have done a lot of that, but we'll be doing more, I can assure you.
What is the infrastructure deficit today?
Our infrastructure deficit is, and I don't have the exact figure, I don't know if LCID has it, but I think it's somewhere in the $150 million range.
Yeah, I had 140, so that's what I kind of thought.
Sort of 140 to 150 in that ballpark.
Yeah.
Councillor, can I get you to wrap up for the moment, and we'll keep going around?
Sure. Just while on the subject then, that we have as a city, our #1 capital priority is to reduce the infrastructure deficit. You mentioned that. Yep. But also in our 2013 capital budget, when I went through it, I was highlighting there was about $6 million of capital projects that had been approved in 2012 that were taken out. And there are some people have suggested, well, maybe that was to make room for the downtown center. So if we're reducing that much just in one capital budget, how are we really attacking the infrastructure deficit?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question, actually, because we continue to address that #1 priority. We have been doing so, and this council and previous councils have been doing so. For example, we continue to invest in infrastructure capital from operating at $3.934 million for 2013, and at a level of $3.784 for 2014 and 2017 for the reconstruction repairs. In 2011, that amount was $3.6 million, and in 2012, it was $3.5 million. So we're obviously putting more money in.
But my question was about what was approved in the 2012 budget. About $6 million was taken out in the 2013 budget.
Well, I'd have to look at. I'm going to describe to you right now is how we're addressing the infrastructure deficit very specifically.
Okay, no, okay? I understand that, but I'll send you the question. You can reply.
Okay, please. And I'll send you the answer. We have a 3-page answer here, 9 points to share with you. Thank you.
Actually, I'm fine. Actually, I will ask one question. I just want to be clear. That $107 million does not include a library or a senior center. So anything beyond, for lack of a better term, stadium is going to be up and above.
Maybe. The 95, it all depends on, it's like any other thing you build. You can decide the quality, and quality decides costs. So this facility will likely include some meeting space. Could we put a library in it for that price? I doubt it. Can we put in seniors programming space? I would argue yes, you probably could, because there will be common meeting spaces and the common rooms and those kinds of things. But to go to the extent of putting a library in, I doubt you could do it for the 95 million.
Would it be something comparable to the Lions Center as we presently have it on St. George Boulevard?
Possibly. It could be of that magnitude, depending on how the other costs flow out of the project, right? It's a little early to decide that. On that point, though, I think we have to consider that we put in the RFQ some of the ancillary developments, and we mentioned the Lions Center in that context within the RFQ, right? Okay. So in the negotiations going forward, certainly under the RFP process, we may be able to repurpose that particular facility as well, right? In other words, take that property and recast it as a larger development, right? Perhaps a residential development with seniors programming space and those kinds of things. But those are decisions that will come down the road as the project evolves through the RFP stage.
Okay, but at this time,
no.
$107 million does not include a library or Lions Center? Okay, just want to make sure.
That's correct.
Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Landry?
Thank you, Worship. No, I'm very good. I'm glad you clarified the situation at the Coliseum, as I was questioning that too. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Leger.
Thank you, Your Worship. And thanks to Councillor Pellerin for asking that question in regard to with respect to the library. I think something that has stayed with me since our budget deliberations is the fact that over 250,000 people went through the library doors last year. Yeah. Whatever we build with respect to an event center requires people there.
Correct.
All the time.
Absolutely.
And so to augment what happens outside of the events. So to me, it's a critical piece of this development. And simply not having it, I think we really need to factor it in. I don't think that's unless there's another option to bring 250,000 people through the doors, and that operates almost 365 days a year. I think I'd like to see that piece. And if it's $5-6 million because that's what we have to pay for, well, then we have to have that discussion, because I think that we need to look at that for what it's worth. And I think ultimately too, I hope that when it comes back, I mean, we are talking about, okay, we're replacing the Coliseum, let's say, but it's the whole, it's more than that. And I think that you're correct that the private sector will probably find ways to contribute. So hopefully you'll come back with that to me, it's a pivotal piece of the puzzle.
Well, I agree entirely. I think the fact of the matter is that we're already paying rent for a library space, so perhaps we should be paying rent to ourselves.
Well, yes, but more importantly,
so if we want, right?
And if we want success in this project, we need people. And people are going to entice retail to develop, and will entice everything else. Not telling you something you don't know, but I mean, I guess ultimately, I thank Councillor Pellerin for asking the question. To me, it needs to be part of this, and we need to factor it in. Maybe we say no, we can't afford it, but we need to have that discussion.
Absolutely,
so
and we do want to pursue that angle.
Okay.
It's very, very, very important, I think, in terms of how you describe it.
Okay, but very well done overall in terms of your presentation. Appreciate that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Your Worship, considering we've been here for 7.5 hours so far, I'm not going to ask any more questions. Thank you.
Councillor Arnold, the challenge is to you.
I would like to second Councillor Henderson's approach, and I have no questions at this time.
Thanks. Briefly on the library issue, are we able to put out a request for tenders which has other add-ons or options? In other words, how much just to do the center, and then how much if we wanted to include the library?
Sure. I mean, you could say easily that we would like the RFP proponents to propose a library space in that facility, and what's the cost?
Yeah.
And how would you do it?
And secondly, I thought I read in the RFQ that we were going to be asking them to come to council with value-added propositions.
Correct.
So that could be other options as well. Correct?
Exactly. It could be the Lion Center property, it could be the Coliseum property.
Yeah.
We listed all those in the RFQ.
Great. That's great. Thank you. Councillor Boudreau.
May the process unfold as it should. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tidio.
I concur.
Councillor Crosman.
No, nothing at this moment, Your Worship. Thank you.
Councillor Bourgeois.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Numéro 6.
Thank you, Your Worship. Number 6.
It's sort of the answer to Councillor, but could, my question was, could letter confirming the province's contribution of $32 million as was indicated in the capital budget? When we had the discussion, I asked, and you said, well, we have a quote from the Premier in the paper. So I said, okay, fine, it's worth what it's worth, but there would be some formal commitment, so we don't have a commitment yet.
No, there's no formal commitment in terms of a dollar amount.
Yeah.
We basically served notice to the province at that point that we're looking for about $32 million, right? Based on that particular financial model where the federal government was not involved, right? At this point, we think the federal government may be involved, so let's try to make that work.
Right.
The province has only stated publicly in words, the Premier's words, mind you, that he supports the project and is willing to consider a formal business case that council will have approved.
OK. Dans la documentation que vous nous présentez aujourd'hui, c'est plus 32 millions.
So it's no more it's 32 million rather than 28 million. So the federal government is going to match. So we'll go get 32 million from the federal government, and there would be less tax to pay for our residents. Well, we need a scenario that's realistic. Like I said before, in big projects like this, normally the governments will not give more than 50%. So we have a realistic project that we put on the table of $95 million, and normally the governments would deal around these levels, so the balance would have to be taken from the local people. It would be the municipalities, contributions, taxes, or associations, local associations. So it doesn't mean it's the final model. No, it's just a model. But it's a realistic model, however. But in December, you told us $32 million from the province is realistic. Yes, but at that time, effectively, we were talking about no participation from the federal, no involvement from the federal government. And the council decided that this would be the capital for this project. So the council decided this, and that's what's in the municipal budget. So I'm talking about the 32 million. In December, you said it was realistic. Now you're telling me 28 million. Is it because the province is in a worse financial situation than in December? No, it's like I explained, if we keep this project with the participation of the federal government, must remember it's a model. In December, it was just a model as well. It wasn't final, and it wasn't written in blood. It was just a model to ensure that we had money in our capital budget if the council wanted to go ahead with the project. Okay, so I guess I'll wait for the final numbers before I think about it. You said about the feasibility in 2009, and we've never discussed it. So this feasibility study was on the theory that if we build it, they'll come. So if we build this center that you mentioned for $100 million, it will another $150 million. And if not, why would we do it if we don't want to generate money? So the theory is if we're building something, then all around there will be more building. Yes, that's what's been shown elsewhere. When we started talking about this project in 2009, I don't know if you were there. I just arrived around that time, yes. So once I mentioned that since we have more and more tax revenue from other buildings around it, why couldn't we have a model similar with the casino where we dedicate taxes and we build this and there's another $150 million around? Couldn't we have a diagram or a formula so that the taxpayers, as we get more revenue deducted from this environment, maybe 100, 150 kilometers, and proportionally it would diminish the amount of taxpayers. Maybe after 15 years it would be half-half, and after 30 years it may be 90% to 10%. And if we wanted the 100 million, 150 million, and the taxes that we get would diminish for the taxpayers, be it $100, $75, that this would be reduced after 15 years and after 30 years.
It's possible. Anything's possible. But what you're talking about are these different taxation zones, if I understand correctly. Once you've established this taxation zone around that and another taxation zone that would include the rest of the population. No, I wouldn't go as far as saying that. No, I wouldn't go as far as saying that. We take the tax on the casino, which has nothing to do with the downtown center, but we said, okay, the tax that we're going to get from the casino is going to be dedicated to that. And then we talked about 150 million, we talked about other figures, and I think that it's Councillor Arnold, but I'm not sure, or she'll correct me if it wasn't her, but she says there's a number of projects that decided to stop and waiting for this one. Now, if we could identify those projects that are waiting and that as soon as we build this, they'll come on board, well, the tax that we get from those projects would be put aside and would help reduce. Yeah, that's possible. I mean, the council could decide to do that in the same way that they for the casino. Yeah, sure, it's possible. Okay, but to say that. But they're going to have to say, well, we will have to identify the properties in question. I mean, it's a question, but once they're identified, that's it. Well, I don't know what list Councillor Arnold had, but in terms of projects that are awaiting this one, but anyhow, that's a possibility. Should I continue on, Your Worship? The feasibility study was based on a figure of 9,000 seats, right? We could build a facility of 9,000 seats. Even if, well, all events, concerts and Wildcat and Miracles games, according to the same feasibility study, it was a 6,000 seats. That was the best case scenario. The realistic scenario was even less. And I know that you did some studies last summer, like 7,500, and you mentioned the feasibility study that's going to be updated. So I just have a couple of questions on the economic impact study. These economic impact study, is it going to look at both scenarios of 9,000 seats or 7,500 seats? Will the economic impact study consider both options? Yes. Okay, great. And this updating on the economic impact, it hadn't been done in the first study. That was one of the gaps there. But if the three companies, well, now we know who they are. They're outside companies, right? Now, will that have an impact? Well, especially it will have an impact in terms of salaries if they declare their revenue in Quebec or Ontario, if that's where most of the employees work. Will that be included in the scenario in the economic impact study, or can we review if the applicants or what? Well, we're going to ask them about that. Yes, of course. So it's included. That's what yeah, we're going to look at all of that. Okay, great. Now, if there was another gap in the economic impact study, is that in that we estimated the revenues that the province and the federal would get in terms of income tax, but we didn't include, and would be the property tax, which has the biggest impact in my opinion, and the sales tax that the province and the federal government will receive for every ticket, for every bag of popcorn and chips that they're going to be sold. There's millions will go back to the federal and provincial coffers, and that wasn't in the economic study. Now, will the Pierre Marcel and David study include that? I'll get back to you on that. Then I'll write it down and get back to you. Should I continue on, Your Worship?
Councillor Hicks.
It might just be the two of us, so you might as well let him finish.
Let's see. Councillor Pellerin. Councillor Landry. Councillor Henderson has said no more, no mas, as has Councillor Arnold, Councillor Boudreau, Councillor Thériault, Councillor Crosman. Back to you, Councillor Bourgeois.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire.
Thank you, Your Worship. The federal budget, you mentioned it, and that's what we had said when I had made a motion in December that was supported by Councillors Hicks, Crossman, and Pellerin, that we should ask for cost recovery. And the council decided not to include that, even though we knew that there was going to be a federal contribution or some sort of Building Canada or infrastructure fund that would qualify us. Now, would this be the time to mark capital budget in order to guarantee the $25 million like we'd adopted in 2010? Or would it be better to wait for final figures and you will suggest a process for budget review? Well, for me, it would be better to wait and to let the project develop when we have a better idea of the costs and on when we get the RFPs, and that's my opinion. I mean, council can decide otherwise. Yeah, but my question is, will it, in your mind, eventually, do you have it in mind that perhaps next December, I don't know if we'll have the information by then, but you would expect to suggest to modify the budget now that we have a federal budget that we put in $25 million or whatever, 20 million for cost recovery? In my mind, yes, because there is a possibility, but it'll depend on whether any responses for qualifications. When we included the 32 million from the provinces, because we had a premier who said he supported it. But if the federal government were to give us an indication, and I'm looking at Mr. Martin here, because accountants will say, well, if there's a chance that we get money and there's an indication, it's a good chance that they will do it. If there's a chance that they'll do it, we include it. Otherwise, we don't include it until we get an answer. So your intention is to do it. Okay, great. On condition that we get clear and specific answers from the federal government on the criteria of their new programs. As long as you have it in mind and you come back with this revised budget, I would appreciate it. And still on the economic impact, a lot of gaps. But there was a lot of useful information, but a lot of gaps. It was promising, and we had asked at the time of the RFPs we had talked about the opportunity costs. It's on page 19 of the document. But the study does not mention any. So in the economic impact study or the David and Pierre Marcel's update, will we get the opportunity costs? I'll get back to you on that. Okay. We talked about import-export, which wasn't included in the economic impact study. Now, as we organize a greater number of events, there's a greater number of people who will be coming here, bigger names. Does the economic impact study, will it measure the detrimental effect of shows? Because mostly it's American and British, Australian artists. So for them, it's an export. They come here, they pick up our money, they go back to Ireland or to Australia or to the States. There are few Canadian or maritime artists who will be coming here. And in the economic impact study, we talked about substitution as well. If it's local money, you spend it here rather than go to the local club. Will the economic impact study look at the negative impact, if there is one, on the retail market or on grocery stores or so on? Is that included? Not that I know of. Kevin? I don't think so, not at that level. Kevin might have something to say.
On the substitution, I know in the first study it was referenced with regards to substitution, and so was money spent on other entertainment and other choices, for example. I expect it will be part of this one as well. If you have specific interests that you definitely want to see as part of an economic impact study, and I have been taking notes, more than happy to receive those to make sure that they're included in the forthcoming study. If there's certain pieces that you really want to see, feel free to detail those, and we'll make sure to do our best to include those.
Okay, quand je vais envoyer le courriel à Jacques.
Yeah, when I send an email to Jacques, I CC you on it? Yeah. Okay, I have two more questions on the economic impact study. This economic impact study, the first one used a simple growth rate of 8% in the calculation of an enhanced assessment growth potential. That seemed a lot to me, seeing as it was, the study was in 2010, I think. Yeah, March 2011. March 2011. So if we look in a year, were they wrong? I mean, on this 8%? If not, would this economic impact study add that as a consideration to say, well, the first hypothesis was this, and seeing as now we've had a year to measure to see if it truly was 8%, is that a realistic figure? Is it 9%? Let's put it at 9. If it's 6, really, let's put 6. That would be useful. And my last question on the economic impact study, are we going to make it public? Yes, we're expecting to make it public around June 6th, because we figure that the report will be completed around May 20th, approximately, and before it's finalized and so on. We expect to bring it to council June. At the same time, or before you have to decide on the acquisition, the purchase of the land? Well, yeah, because I had received it, but I wasn't able to go consult economists to ask them, does this make sense? Because it was a confidential and private document, because a part of it included the different locations, the different sites. So if it's public, that's great. Then I can go consult other colleagues and economists and ask them. Perfect. So I'll stop there. I have 4 questions left, but I'll let Councillor Hicks ask his first.
Councillor Hicks, Councillor Bourgeois is offering you 4 questions. Oh, no, sorry. He's offering you the opportunity. Did you want to take the mic?
Apparently the council needs a break, so I'll just step in for a few minutes.
Looking forward to it.
I think it's really important, Councillor Bourgeois brought this up, that we be as open and transparent as we possibly can. And Thunder Bay is a city that I've been last little while, a few years. They have a really interesting project. They're almost at the same point as us. They're a bit larger city. They're about 111,000, and I think their arena is going to be around 5,500 seats. But everything's on the webpage. So there's not much on our webpage about this project. So is that one thing we could do for taxpayers is start putting all this information as we get it on a webpage so they can take a look at it?
Yep, we can. The challenge here, of course, is always we have to make sure what we publish publicly is translated. We're going to make our best efforts to publish everything we can possibly publish within reason, right? In terms of that information. So whatever we generate, we're going to putting it up on the website and going forward with it.
Okay. We've been getting, certainly some of us on council, and I think more and more, all of council are starting getting emails from people really concerned about, the tax rate or whatever. And as I hear, that was always, and still is my major concern on this, is how do we do this without impacting so greatly? And in the information that we got Thursday, there was a number of $10 million of cash, and I sent an email to Mr. Martin this morning saying that was kind of explain that, because I'd never seen that before.
Right.
In our 2013 operating budget, we said that to run the city exactly the same manner as we did in 2012 and 2013, it was going to take $120.1 million. That left the city with $4.9 million left to spend or do whatever they wanted with it. But I guess, unfortunately, one of the reasons why I didn't vote against why I voted against the capital and operational budget was that this was the first year that we actually didn't reduce the tax rate. We had been able to do that with the previous 4 councils. So I think the $300,000 was put in a reserve, I'm calling it a reserve tax dollars from the casino, and 1.6 from the police subsidy, and that totaled about $1.9 million. And is that where the $10 million is coming from, that over the next 3 years we're kind of taxing people already for a project we haven't even approved on council?
What our plan is, and what council's approved to date, is to take money that represents the casino revenue,
yeah,
and some dollars from the savings in the RCMP.
Yes.
And so at the end of 2013, council approved this decision. It was a council decision. At the end of 2013, we will have $3.243 million set aside for the downtown center. Now, the way Mr. Martin and I have been discussing this is that if council stays the course, in other words, if it continues to dedicate, and the casino revenues is going to increase, we're taking a third of it and 50% of it, and et cetera, but it's a graduated scale where we're taking a larger portion of the casino revenue every year until we're up there to a reasonable amount of money. By the end of 2016, that casino revenue plus the savings from the RCMP, a portion of that, will add up to about $10.5 million. And I actually have a schedule here I can show you and file with council if you wish, that shows every year, at the end of 2013, we'd have $3.2 million. End of 2014, we have $5.4 million. End of 2015, we have $7.9 million. And at the end of 2016, we'd have $10.5 million. That produces the land acquisition, right? So you can actually pay for the land cash, right? And let's say we buy it at the end of June, we'll simply buy it out of cash flow and simply pay ourselves back through the money we bring in through those reserves, those deposits. Okay. Now that's not unlike anybody who wants to buy a house or build a commercial property. You should have a down payment, right? In this particular case, we're talking about a $10 million down payment on about a $95 to $100 million project. So that's how we're thinking about it. Council could change its mind. Council has already authorized deposits of $3.24 million in that particular reserve dedicated towards the downtown center. It could stop that. It could say we're going to take on more debt if it decides to go ahead.
Look, I totally understand that. It was just the concept. Like, I was at the Coliseum when we did a couple of shifts there, and the way it was worded, obviously everybody would say yes, we want it, because there was no talk taxes. During the last election campaign, I think I had 3 people actually bring up the downtown center when we were going to do it, and I said, fine, I love spending your money. How much do you want to pay? And people say, well, nobody's talked about paying yet.
Sure.
In the last 2 election campaigns, on my literature, I've never even put that down. Doesn't mean I don't support it. No. It just, in my area of the city, it just wasn't a big concern. People are concerned about other things. But my calculation was, roughly, when I tell people, especially people who really don't think this is a good idea, but I say, do you realize, I think that you're paying taxes in 2013 at the tune of about 2.3 cents on the tax rate, or in a $150,000 home, about $34, for a project council hasn't even approved yet, and they can't believe that. So that's basically true, isn't it? We are taxing people in 2013 for a project council hasn't approved?
You're actually taxing people for a project that council approved in principle and set aside money in this capital budget. That's, I would categorize it in that way. Okay. Now, as the project is to the fine point of the discussion, has council approved the final project and final financial modalities around the project? No, it has not. Has it approved the project in principle in its 5-year capital plan? Yes, it has. So there is a difference there. So people are being taxed for the project, right? and a project that may or may not happen, right? At the end of the day, through the next 15 months, that council will decide whether that project goes ahead or not. But it's like anything else. You know, if you want to build a house, remember, when we first got married, we decided, well, we're going to try to save enough money to put a down payment on the house. Does that mean we actually going to buy a house? No, we're going to try to save enough money to buy that house. This is sort of the same thing in my estimation.
And, you know, with the numbers that we got tonight, which again have changed since Thursday, but you know, this even seems more doable. I mean, I'm encouraged if these are now the numbers
we're trying to bring the numbers down
with, not Thursdays. I didn't like Thursdays, and all my questions were based on $65 million. So I'm glad over the weekend they've changed. What I like about this is that we're talking about $37.7 million. We're talking $12 million of land. And I think as I talked to the people from the Hotel Association, and I was really glad to see that they were receptive to looking at funding this longer, because from both Downtown Moncton Inc., who's probably going to, their members are going to benefit more than anybody else in the city, but also from the Hotel Association, we have to finance this over 30 years. And it would be like the province and the Fed saying, well, we're going to give you money for the first 10 and then you're on your own. You're either in this or you're not. So I think if we can work with Downtown Moncton Inc., if we can work with the Hotel Association and get the funding over 30 years, you know, and that's going to actually come off of the 37.7, we might be able to make, you know, the numbers work better. So I'm encouraged that with these numbers, they look much better than Thursday's numbers.
Thank you.
Just to get back to that taxing, and I agree, it's in principle, but we've also been told by staff all along the way that by going in principle, you're not committing to anything. Did we ever actually ask anybody in the provincial government or anything, like, can we tax people for a project we haven't approved?
The monies that were set aside in reserves have been done under the provincial statute, completely legal, completely appropriate under the circumstances as was determined by council at budget time.
Yeah, but as reserves in the past, it's for things like snow plowing, the snow budgets, or whatever, things we know are going to happen. And this one, I guess the only reason I bring it up, I had lunch, or I had a coffee with Kevin Taxpayers Federation and talked to him because a lot of people are telling me that we need a group like that in the city. And he was kind of surprised that we could actually tax people for a project we hadn't approved. So we'll get back to that. In our 2012 application before the Capital Borrowing Board, which lays out our operational debt, we said that in 2012, we said in 2014, our outstanding debt would be $33.9 million, but in this 2013 application, we said it would be $110.2, which is a difference of 23.7. I'll go up to 2016. In 2012, we said in 2016 it would be $159.9 million. This year, in the current one that we just applied, it was $117.8, a difference of $42 million. So how have we been able to reduce our outstanding debt before the Capital Borrowing Board by 23.7 million, 47.7 million in 2015, 42.1 million in 2016?
Good question. I'm going to pass that over to Mr. Martin.
Your Worship, I just want to make sure, Councillor Hicks, I understand your question. Don't forget, we are repaying debt every month. And one of the, under the, you know, our fiscal responsibility, I mean, this issue, we have shortened payment quite aggressively over the last number of years, where, you know, we have 5-year assets, now we try to pay them off in 5 years. So those types of things have helped us continue to control the debt levels. We've also seen reasonable increases in the assessment, which has, of course, helped us control the debt service cost. So it's a case of debt that we're incurring on an annual basis, less the repayments.
You know, I've said for many years, jokingly, that probably I'm the only one at council that really looks at these, and this is my favorite document of all the ones we get all year. Councillor Legier now might be joining me because I know I've sent these to him, and I know he likes to look at numbers too. But this is 12 months apart.
Well, Councillor, yes, there's, Your Worship.
So they've improved that much, 23.7 million in 2014, 47.7 million, a reduction in our outstanding debt projection in 2015, and 42.1 million in 2016?
Well, Councillor, don't forget that each year in the capital budget, the council actually authorizes the most current year, and the other years are projections. So each year, the capital budget, and sometimes it's, I'd have to look back and do an analysis of it, but, for instance, in the last year, we added the police station. The work that's going to be, done there. We've put in an amount for that. As you've indicated and others have indicated, the monies that we had in for the downtown center have changed over the last number of years. So the capital budget past the end of the current year is a pretty fluid number. And each year, council establishes their priorities for capital, and then they approve the capital budget, including the 4-year projection.
No, look, I'm not knocking. I think these are wonderful. I've never seen these before, these reductions. Anyway, I'm going to send these in, and you can have some more time and perhaps explain it a little better, because whatever happened last year, let's do it again next year.
Your Worship, just, to Councillor Hicks' point, these documents are prepared for the Capital Borrowing Board, and they're prepared under the rules that they have. And they're doing these documents for all the municipalities in New Brunswick that we all borrow centrally through the provinces, as you know. So their rules dictate how the projects are bonded. So there's times when we have projects, and as we all know, that they don't get off the ground, but they're on the books. And they might be on the books for a couple of years longer than was anticipated. But when these are set up, they're presumed to be bonded as if they're going to be done within that year, and then bonded immediately. So this is what I'm saying, as the projects change and as the amounts change, the priorities change, these numbers shift a lot from a year-to-year basis. What they're looking at is where we stand now and how it looks on that basis, on a conservative basis. We're going to come back here in a couple of weeks with a 30-year plan. And I can't guarantee the 30-year plan is going to look like this, because it's under a whole different set of assumptions. So these are guides. These are more rule-of-thumb guides. That are there any early warning signals that we should be looking at? That has to do with the level of debt, has to do with the debt service ratio, and all those types of things.
No, and that's exactly what my question was. When you see reductions this drastic, you kind of wonder if there is a change in priorities, if there are things that have been taken out. So,
look, there have been dramatic changes in the capital budget every year.
Well, let's look. I keep them all too. I just don't remember seeing reductions this drastic.
No problem.
Okay. Over the last few years, council has been presented with information.
Councillor Hicks, if you don't mind, I'd like to go back to Councillor Bourgeois just to get him finished. We've had 15 minutes now. I'm just trying to move things along.
I'm fine.
Councillor Bourgeois is fine. Carry on.
Thank you. Over the last few years, council has been presented with information about the effects of climate change in our city, and we've been shown maps about affected areas and whatever. And in one meeting, I actually said that I was kind of concerned about us being in a position of seeing things that we can't share. So in early February, I believe council passed a motion which said, in part, be it therefore resolved that Moncton City Council requests the federal government of Canada to proceed with financing of Stage 3 of the Petitcodiac River Restoration Project to allow the province of New Brunswick to complete the construction of the partial bridge on the Petitcodiac Causeway quickly as possible. And on March 25th, 2013, the city sent a letter to the Prime Minister. We want to explore funding for a downtown center, a project that, as I mentioned earlier, we haven't even approved yet. Have we sent a letter to the Prime Minister requesting funding as per this motion in early February of Council concerning our river to help with the potential flooding in our downtown, and if not, why?
I'm not particularly aware that there's been a letter sent to the Prime Minister about the new bridge across Petitcodiac. I'm not aware, unless the mayor has sent one. I'm not aware that the letter exists.
I'm just asking if one had, because we've sent one on the downtown center.
All I can respond to that is I'm not aware that the letter has been sent to the Prime Minister in that regard.
Okay. When that's fine. When Councillor Hoare and I met with the architects who designed the fourplex, we learned a lot about these types of facilities. And they asked us was how much the city had committed to this project, because they said that in the successful projects that they've been involved in all around North America, the council setting that number right at the very start was the most important thing they would do, because that defined the project. And with the numbers I had on Thursday, over 2.5 years or 3 years, the project's increased by about 124%. So using the $65 million figure now, it looks like it's lower. So why didn't...
Pourquoi le personnel n'a-t-il jamais demandé au conseil combien vous vous engagez dans cela? Nous l'avons demandé. Je pense qu'il y a des sommes mises de côté depuis les 2 derniers budgets pour le centre multifonctionnel. Donc, chaque fois, le conseil a approuvé ce budget. Je le pensais, mais je ne pense pas que je ne l'ai approuvé.
When council received the downtown task force, to me, there was a very clear indication from city council what they wanted. But now you're saying everything that council has approved in future has meant now that we're looking at whatever the numbers are today.
I would argue that council adopted a resolution back in 2010, which has effectively been overridden by 2 decisions. Or at least 1 decision, and that was the capital budget of 2013, where the council basically decided to set aside the monies that are indicated in the council report form. So that's the indication, that's the message that staff understood.
Okay.
Said, here it is. And does that mean that we're working to a higher number and we're promoting a higher number? No. What it means is that council had dedicated some funds in the capital budget for purposes of building a downtown center. You know, as we all know around here, when we put money in the capital budget, doesn't mean it's going to get spent. It has to be fixed, it has to be associated with a very specific project under very specific terms and conditions that council approves. So in this particular case, we have a project now that we have a different scenario in this particular presentation tonight that's different than what council put in that particular project, and in fact, effectively different than that $75 million project. Although not that much different, because I'll remind you again that if you look at the $25 million that council said they wanted to spend on this project in 2010 dollars, those 2010 dollars today are actually worth $30 million. So the project, the scenario we're talking about tonight, is actually only worth about, if everything came to being as the way I described it earlier in that scenario, and it's only a scenario. It's all based on suppositions and assumptions. That project would only cost $28 million. So we're effectively in the same ballpark, right? The question is, how do you get there? How do you make it work? How do you reduce the exposure to the city? Our job, and the direction I'm giving to the staff here, is that we need to bring that number down to something that we can all live with, right? That we can all say, yep, that's a good deal for the city and going forward. So, you know, I'd be the last person that wants to go out and spend $65 million on this project. You know, I would rather spend less. So I too am a taxpayer. You know, I can tell you how much money I pay in my taxes on my property, and it's substantial. So I would like to see that number as low as possible, right? That being said, is the project important? Yes. Should it be built at any cost? Absolutely not, right? But that's the question. That any cost is a question that you as council as a whole must determine, right? Eventually, based on a specific proposal coming from the private sector as under what they offer up, right? And that'll be a negotiation. That'll be once they file those RFP documents, that'll become a negotiation.
Oh, and I think as we go on, because I will keep going back to that 2010 resolution, so we can debate that. And
sure.
And I can just guarantee you, as your city councillor, I am doing everything I can to protect your tax rate.
I appreciate that, sir.
Back during the last council, back in February of 2012, Councillor Hoare was quite interested in the refurbishment study, and she's been asking me where are those reports, because I think at the time we were told we were going to get it in April of 2012. So it has taken a fair bit of time to get that. You're saying it's upstairs in our boxes.
Yep.
I know there are some engineers out there that are interested in kind of looking at this, so could that is that document made available to them also so they can
Sure.
review it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any chance of getting any of that on a PDF format or something like that so we could move it around easily?
I could give you a couple extra copies if you'd like to have. I've got extra copies, so I can give you on PDF format. It would be kind of difficult because of the nature of the document. It's got pullouts and, you know, big drawings, and
Okay.
it's kind of a complicated, you know, it's got a series of engineering drawings that look like that, right? It's hard to, but I've got extra copies. So.
Maybe if you had one extra copy, that would be good enough.
Okay, yeah, no problem at all. I can actually give you, I'll give you this one if you want.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Dubé.
Thank you.
Councilor Bourgeois, you said you had 4 questions.
Pardon?
You said you had 4 questions.
Yeah, but he asked 2 of them, so I just have 2 left.
Excellent, wonderful.
Une, c'est une opinion légale. J'aimerais d'avoir une opinion légale parce qu'il y a quelqu'un qui m'a posé la question suivante.
When residents of Hildred wanted remuneration from the city for flooding damage in August 2000 now, the legal advice that we received was that as long as the council is making efforts, reasonable efforts, to eliminate the deficit and is investing reasonably to eliminate problems, then we wouldn't be negligent. Therefore, we wouldn't be sued, although we could be found guilty. So my question is if the council invests 53, 28, whatever amount, 28 million, if the council invests this for the multiplex, rather than investing this in structure where we have problems, we have things to replace. So if we make a conscious decision to say that we're going to take 28 million and rather than repair the problems we have, that we're going to spend it on the center, is there somebody going to come later with a flooding, which is the city's fault, then would the city be negligent? I just need a legal advice. You don't have to answer right away, but probably little research to say what jurisprudence would tell us if we do this, or what would the problems be. So my last question would be your presentation. I don't have it before me. How could we consult people? How can we, in a meaningful way, people's opinion? Are you going to come back to us? Do you have details you can share with us tonight? We want to go through a social media, deliver a discourse, a speech from the mayor on this project, and there's going to be on the 29th of May symposium for the seniors, and there's going to be other events as well, and we'll have an open door session, town hall meeting somewhere. So we're working on that. We're making plans for this, and we'll come back to the council with this plan. And there will also be surveys. We have one online that's been used slightly, the panel. So between now and the beginning of May, on the 6th, the meeting of May 6th, we want to come to the council the same night that John will present his plan. We want to present before the council a communication plan that will deal with May and June and even later. So there's steps to follow after May and June. If the council says yes and yes, then there'll be other negotiations. So we expect that to give you more detailed plans on communications. Thank you for your patience and the information you gave us. And I'll send you a copy of an email, certainly for the environmental impact and all that. And thank you, Your Worship, for giving us this opportunity to discuss this publicly. Thank you.